much for the introduction. So, very happy to be here and to kick things off. Very grateful to be invited, honored that you would have me up here on stage to launch the Evolutionary Forum. Thank you, Fiona, Xian, and all those, Sophie, that got me here. Really appreciate that. Wonderful to see all the faces here in the audience. As I was sitting in the audience, I was looking at all the presentations and the speakers, and I was jealous. I want to attend those too. There's a lot of good topics here. A lot of folks that I know actually are here as well. A lot of folks exploring this space. And I was kind of asked to frame where we are with the whole self-organization movement, where things are, and where things are going. So I'm Thomison, as I was introduced. I'm a US entrepreneur, so I tend to wave my hands a lot and tend to be overly enthusiastic at some times. So if you'll forgive me for that right up front. Hopefully the translators will be okay with translating as we go here. But I started my journey as an entrepreneur early age, and like many of you, had all kinds of varieties of experience in organization life. And about 10 years or so ago, I just sold a company. And we failed, actually, at trying to achieve some of the goals that we want to achieve in organizations. We are experiencing the same endemic problems. And so that actually led me to that classic entrepreneurial mantra: there must be a better way. So after 20-some years of trying to improve organization life as a management consultant, as a change agent, finding that everything that we tried, all the cool, clever techniques, landed in the same system that somehow atrophied and ate away at all the goodness that was embedded in those techniques, and those techniques withered away and died. I don't know if that's your experience. How many business owners do we have in the audience? A few. How many executives running companies? A few more. How many management consultants helping companies run themselves better, hopefully? Some HR professionals? Wonderful. So I want to talk a little bit about what's happening in our organizational space, in the organizational environment, and what's changing. It's a funny thing about change and moving into what's next. It's always that game of what's now and what's next. Evolution is always moving forward. So there's always a next evolutionary step. And I don't know about you, but when did it dawn on you that there's actually more steps? So no matter how far we think we've come, either as a species, right, or as an organization, there are always more steps. And so this is an evolutionary journey that we're on. There's not like an end point. There's where you are right now, really understanding where you are right now in your current environment, your current constraints, your current practices, and then getting a vision for what's next. And there's actually a wonderful topic on this by a friend of mine that's in the audience from Dwarfs and Giants that will be talking about this journey in more detail. So you've got lots of opportunities to explore with Sasha Bernardis from Dwarfs and Giants, who's in the audience, talking about this now and next journey. So as an evolutionary journey, we have some good practices, some good resources to lean on. I got the opportunity to work with Fred Lelou as he was doing research on his book. How many have read Reinventing Organization? Awesome place to go for some background on this evolutionary journey, talking about how organizations transform themselves over time. So I got to talk a lot with Fred as he was researching different organizations and different organizational practices. And he discovered some recurring themes. He discovered that organizations develop too. They're on their own evolutionary journey. And that evolutionary journey informs how they're structured, how they're run, what your relationship is to them. This is huge, right? It's not like we were trying to get to an end point with organizations. Organizations evolve. They evolve as we evolve. So as we evolve as a species, as humans, with our capacities to deal with complexity and change, that informs our organizational structures. So if you're looking for deep background on this journey, this evolutionary journey, Fred has done the research for us. And this is where this power system, these power structures come from. As you can see, moving up the chain, there is a stage-by-stage, step-by-step progression to different power systems. And this is important. This is really actually key to this evolutionary journey. We're dealing with how we structure power, how we hold and structure power. So organizations are powered by decision-making processes. And these decision-making processes change and evolve over time. So, I don't know if I've got a pointer here. Whoops, that's not what I do. So you can see a lot has been talked about with the TEAL practices. Anybody familiar with that term, TEAL, organizational practices? This comes from Fred's book, talking about that late stage evolutionary development point where we begin to think about power holding much differently than what came before. So this is a natural progression of power systems. And the interesting thing is they show up in our power structures as well. So you can see, historically, we've had a pyramid approach, right? Nothing new there. We've kind of moved to this very complex management hierarchy system. And we're moving even further into meshworks, networks, team-of-team processes. So the way we hold power, the way we think about what an organization is, informs its structures. So organization structures morph and change as well. I have had an opportunity to work with many organizations that are in this structure, and we've gotten very clever, us humans, of trying to improve our organizational life by creating matrices and dotted lines and all kinds of crazy cross-functional teaming, right, to try to improve the organization's work and the organizational experience. But ultimately, no matter how clever we are, it comes down to a power structure and decision-making systems that really rule the day. Elliot Jacks actually wrote a book called Requisite Organization, and he made this point, saying that in any organization, there's actually 3 types of organizational structures at play at any given moment. There's the written down one that sometimes comes from HR. Sorry, HR, don't mean to offend. Sometimes not. But there's the written down org chart, this one, typically. And then there's the org chart that is the real org chart, the one that he called the excellent org chart, just a fancy name for the real power structures at play. It's like, I know who to go to get my work done. I know who to go to that has the experience I need, independent of what the org chart says. That's the extant, or the natural structure that's operating. But then he pointed out there's an even more natural requisite structure, something he called requisite organization. That was the organizational structure that would be natural to the work. And this is where we're evolving to. And we kind of get glimpses of this in the last chart here, where we have a different type of network structures that are organized around a different principle. A principle not of power structures, but of work structures. So overall, there is this growing trend to ever more self-organization. This is a thing. I've been at this for 10 years, helping organizations big and small, public and private, helping to make this leap, helping to transform themselves into what's next. So I've been doing this for 10 years, but this is even older than that. We have earlier pioneers that have been unsatisfied with the status quo, unsatisfied with the current state of our organizational systems, and they started to experiment and pioneer on their own. So some of the names that you might recognize, Valve, Gore, Morningstar. These are organizations that kind of had that same frustration in the last couple decades and started to figure out new ways of organizing and structuring themselves. And they are the early pioneers of the self-organization movement. Holacracy, down here at the bottom, HolacracyOne is a company that I co-founded with my partner. There we go. HolacracyOne is a company I co-founded with my partner, Brian Robertson. And what we did is we took the learning of the early pioneers and systematized that learning into a rule set, a constitution that could be adopted by any organization that wanted to embrace these self-organizing principles. So instead of having to grow it your own, figure out all the issues of how to create a self-organizing structure, you could rely on one that had been tested and built upon all the early experimenters, early pioneers. And we have other pioneers actually in the room. So we have Springist here. Ruben Timmerman's got an awesome talk. He's been practicing for over 3 years at his company. I mentioned Dwarfs and Giants. We've got good representation there. Early pioneers taking these self-organizing principles and moving them out into the world. You can see some folks from maybe the sociocracy movement here as well. Any sociocracy practitioners? No? A few? Yep. Great. All right. So let's talk about more concretely what this looks like. So these are the trends. These are the early movers, some of them in the room here, from whom you're going to hear from on their experiences in this new world of work. And the new world is always a now, next game. So it's always the new world of work, right? So generationally, if you've been at business and playing the great game of business for 10 years or 20 years, I've heard this story before, right? The next new thing, right? The next paradigm shift. Something that if I can just kind of hunker down and wait out, it will go away with time, right? It's kind of one of those classic change maneuvers, waiting it out. But I tell you this time, in my experience over the last 10 years, there is something fundamental shifting. There is an evolutionary tipping point to something new. A new way to think about organizational work, organizational life, and power holding, and our relationship to it all. So this is big, and it's not going anywhere. It's getting more widespread, more coverage, more people refusing to work the way we worked before in the past, and wanting to work in a brand new way. As Fred would call it, embracing evolutionary purpose, embracing wholeness, and to be self-managed. So I put together 5 principles of the new world of work. What are the markers? What should we be looking for? What should you be looking for today and tomorrow as you're exploring these topics? What your now is and what your next is. How do you see these principles showing up in your work, in your organization, in your practice? So these 5 principles, we're going to talk a little bit about each. The first being purposeful. The new world of work is about purpose. It's about a new structure called a holarchy. It's about being dynamic, responsive, able to turn on a dime. It's about autonomy and transparency. Some of the very principles of this forum are embedded in the new world of work. These are self-organizing principles. These are the principles that are baked in to those early pioneers' work. These are the principles baked into Teal practices. These are the principles baked into the Holacracy Constitution that if you elect to do so, you can change your organization by embracing these principles in a concrete rule set. So let's talk about each. Purpose. So what does it mean to be purposeful? There are tons of definitions about being, what is purpose anyway? How do you define purpose? And I hold it a little bit differently. Purpose is paramount in self-organization. Purpose is the new boss. Purpose is the new motivator. Purpose is what you do to decide when confronted with a choice, what path to take. Should I make this decision or this other good decision? What informs you about that choice? Not your boss, because you don't have one. Your purpose, or the purpose of the organization, or the purpose of your specific work. So purpose rules, quite literally, in a self-organized, self-managed system. It all hangs on purpose. Any of you seen the US film, it's probably a couple of decades old, Forrest Gump? It's like in the 1990s, 1996. Some of you may not have been born. So Forrest Gump had these sayings. Life is like a box of chocolate, right? You never know what you're gonna get. Stupid is as stupid does. A cute little saying. I think purpose is as purpose does. Purpose is about doing. It's the choice making, the action taking. And you understand your purpose in the doing, not in the thinking. So purpose pulls you to action. Purpose is the tug that informs what work is needed and how you're going to unpack that work into the future. So everything hangs on purpose. Next up is holarchic, a new structure. So this is one of my pet peeves. Having been in this business for the last 10 years, trying to change our organizational structures, right? So the new world of work is not flat. The new world of work is not equal amongst everyone. In fact, nature abhors flatness. Nature structures in a natural hierarchy, right? So that's what a holarchic structure is. It's a natural hierarchy. And this is what we want in organizations. Not those fancy org charts, those fancy, clever org charts with all the dotted lines and the matrices and the cross-functional teams, but a new structure. A structure not of personal power holding, but a structure of the work for purpose. This is huge. This informs the actual structure of the organization itself. The classic org chart goes away. The power holding personally goes away. This is a big deal. Holacracy can be defined in many, many ways. One of them is that it's a complete wholesale replacement for management hierarchy. Full stop. That's one sentence, but it will take a while to wrap your mind around the implications of that. So it's a complete wholesale replacement. Self-organization, self-management done right, done well, done completely at its evolutionary endpoint, is a complete structural replacement for what came before. The management hierarchy goes away and is replaced with something new. A natural hierarchy of the work, something called a holarchy. Next up, dynamic. So, this comes in many, many flavors. Dynamic processes. There's the whole responsive movement, agile movement, lean movement, just-in-time thinking. These are all great principles. We want to embed and bake these principles into our self-organizing operating systems. So we want to move away from the predict and control nature that is baked into our current corporate structures. So most of the organizational processes we have today are based on the ability to predict and then control for outcomes. Predict and control is the standard. But the funny thing is, having done this over now 30-some years, and I bet it's your experience too, we are terrible predictors. Humans are really lousy at predicting the future. right? We're great at sensing what's needed in any given moment, but we're not so good at looking out 3 years, 5 years. Sometimes we have the illusion that we're good at that, but all in, we typically are much better at sensing present moment needs, what's the now context, what's needed now to move to next. We're really good at that. So we want a system that optimizes what humans are good at. The ability to sense where we are now and the ability to move to what's next. What's next for purpose. So we bake these principles in, dynamic principles. This is how you adopt lean or agile across the entire organization. These are often initiatives, right? In conventional organizations, how many are running an agile movement, right? Or a lean movement, or Scrum, or whatever you want to call it. These principles are awesome. We want to see these principles baked into the fabric of how the organization is structured and run. So, dynamic principles, holarchic principles, everything hangs on purpose. Next up is autonomy. We have a speaker coming up where everyone is the CEO. I love that. So, autonomous. In the new world of work, in a self-organized system, you lead. You lead unhindered from any other boss that can trump your decision, can step on you in any way. You have autonomy. You have autonomy to lead your work towards what? Purpose. Lead your work towards purpose. And in turn, follow others that are leading their work. This is huge. This begins to introduce some of the wholeness principles that Fred talks about in his book. Honoring one another. The core is human. That's another topic that I saw on the board. I want to attend that one too. It's honoring each individual's capacities to lead and to follow them. And to have a sense of your own leadership skills and lead your work. This is a transformative principle that is baked into these self-organizing systems that changes everything. So we have autonomous systems. The graphic here is to kind of give you a sense that the autonomy lives within a broader context of rules, knowing where the boundaries are. So sometimes you can lead very fast. Great. Other times you need to slow down so you don't run into something else. Cool. So it's being aware of the constraints within an autonomous system. Another way of describing holacracy, there are many, many ways of describing holacracy, but it's a distributed system of autonomy. So it distributes individual autonomy throughout the organization, giving everybody the ability to lead and follow their work. The last one up, transparent. Or the next to last one up, transparent. So, transparency. To make this work, we need a radical degree of visibility into all the functionings of the organization. There are no more sacred cows, no more privileged classes, no more fiefdoms to protect. We want as much transparency as you can stomach, right? So open book management, that's been around for a decade or so. It's open book management on steroids. It's open book management as much as you can stomach. This is important so that you know how to lead your work. You need to know what those constraints are, what the boundaries are, what kind of measurements and metrics are guiding our work processes. We want all of this to be visible, as much visibility and transparency again as you can stomach. This again is huge. So this will have practical implications on salary systems, compliance systems, privacy issues, privileged classes that are making decisions that affect other people. These walls drop. In a system that is self-organized, self-managed, transparency rises, and as much transparency as you can build into the system. So these are the 5 principles that I'd like for you to look for. In your own work, what's here now? What's happening in your organization life right now? And how well are these principles being practiced? Do you have lean initiatives, high-performance teams, self-directed teams, employee engagement initiatives, leadership development initiatives, agile initiatives? How well are they embracing these principles? If you're running holacracy or sociocracy or experimenting with teal practices, how well are you baking in these principles? Everything for purpose, no power held personally, new structure, everything dynamic, transparent and autonomous. So these are the new markers for the new world of work, and something I would invite you to hold with you over the next 2 days, looking for these in the presentations that you hear and seeing how they line up with your own organization. And these are 5 simple principles, but they have huge ramifications. This happened to me in my own shift, my own language shifts. So things that we're accustomed to, just kind of by default, like the very definition of what an organization is, begins to change. So right there in the middle, when I'm making talks all over the world and speaking to smaller audiences, I will ask, what's your definition of an organization? What is your definition of an organization? And invariably, I will get a definition very similar to the one here listed in the middle, which was actually very similar to my own for the first 20, 30 years of my organizational life. It's one that I kind of liked, where an organization was a group of like-minded, passionate people. Sounds nice. All coming together to do really cool work in the world. That sounds nice. But that's actually not what we're looking for in a self-organized system. We're organized around purpose. And it's not about personal power holding. And it's not about a group of people. It's about a structure to express purpose. A structure to do work in pursuit of purpose. So this changes our definitions. Even how we think fundamentally of what an organization is. It's a structure to pursue purpose. And this changes also our language about ownership, power structures. So the notion of my team drops. Who's my anyway, right? The notion of I have a business to run, or it's my company. These completely drop. And it refocuses everyone on purpose, which is really kind of cool, I think. So these have major implications, even in your own language, about my employees, my business, my team. So let's look at how these play out in real world. So over the last 10 years, I've deployed Holacracy as one of the self-organizing systems that we've talked about all over the world with many, many companies. One that you've probably heard about most is Zappos. Anybody tracking the Zappos implementation? Now running 3-some years. Yep. So a lot of things happen. Tony Hsieh, who is the current former CEO, on the inside anyway, of Zappos, very progressive entrepreneur, always looking for new ways to keep the organization current and relevant and active. Their purpose, delivering happiness. Tony, always looking for more ways to make the company more aligned to that purpose. Notice that as their organization was growing larger and getting older, some of the unwanted things were showing up. Bureaucracy, slow decision making, predicted control, fiefdoms, classic organizational culture that was unwanted. So he was looking for a way to break that up, looking for a way to bring the entrepreneurial spirit back to his company. And so a few years ago, he decided to adopt Holacracy and took a journey of deploying this throughout the organization, and over the last 3 years has completely transformed the organization top to bottom, implementing a new rule set that distributes power and authority decision making completely, distributes leadership completely, distributes purpose all the way down to the individual who's answering the phone and dealing with a client or a customer. It gets everyone involved in the running of the organization. Notice the quote. There was a McKinsey Quarterly article that was done with Tony just last month. And the quote, our organization, the org chart, is available real time, dynamic. Everyone is participating in processes that run and structure the organization. This is huge. This is not a top-down affair. Everyone is involved in processes that structure the organization. And it happens 50 times a day throughout the entire organization. Imagine that your org, your company, reorganizes 50 times a day. Unimaginable. Undesirable, for sure, in a conventional organization, right? But this is the dynamic principle played out, where everyone is sensing what's needed and figuring out how to make fine-tune adjustments to the organization structure. So in this one observation, you get a glimpse of what can happen with a very large organization, a subsidiary of a US public company with 1,500 employees, who over about a 2-year journey made the transition from a conventional management hierarchy, even a progressive one, even with a progressive leader, even with a purpose of delivering happiness, even with a very strong culture and community, recognizing that that was not enough. That was not enough to stay competitive and relevant in the 21st century global economy. Something else was needed. That something else was a self-organizing system, moving the evolutionary organizational paradigm forward and embracing something like holacracy. There are many examples I can give, and if you catch me over the next couple days, I'd be happy to dig into more details. Another quick one that comes to mind, and we're almost at the end of our time. A company, again in the US, adopted holacracy and decided that they needed to grow and scale. So it's a financial controls company, and they were on an acquisition merge. So they actually used holacracy as an integration tool for mergers and acquisitions. So you can imagine, as you're acquiring other companies, you need to standardize on some management system. So they deployed holacracy in their home headquarters. They oriented everyone to that. And then when they acquired other companies, they folded those organizations into the corporate, the parent company, using the new management system. So this gave them a new acquisition and integration tool. And if you're familiar with mergers and acquisitions, you know that they're fraught with failure, mainly around the cultural and management issues. So this is an example of where holacracy was used as a really good M&A tool for integration. And there are many, many stories about people, and you'll hear from some of the presenters today. Ruben's up in a couple moments, a couple speakers ahead, to talk about his own experience in this journey. So, just a glimpse of what's next. So that was mine now, over the last 10 years. Holacracy is a self-organizing practice, a complete replacement for management hierarchy. So from my standpoint, I've done that. I have lived this for a decade, moving from a classic power structure to something new, a new organizational structure, a new holarchy. And we've made great progress now, in my mind, over the last decade, of self-organizing the work. New operating systems, new organizational operating systems that embrace those principles, awesome. We've done a really good job of figuring out how to express work in pursuit of purpose without management hierarchy. Way cool. What's next? There's always a next. There's always that next evolutionary step. So for some organizations that have been practicing for many years, new questions arise. It's like, great, we've replaced the management hierarchy. Everybody's involved. We reorganize many times a week. We're all for purpose. But what about ownership? Corporate structures, capital structures. And if an organization isn't a group of like-minded people, where do the people live? So these are the new emergent questions. And so being the entrepreneur that I am, and having a front row seat at how real executives and real people align to these systems, and seeing where the holes are, I launched a new organization 2 years ago to continue to evolve the journey, to figure out what those next steps might be. So the self-organization journey continues, where we've done a great job of self-organizing the work. And we have rule systems that everybody can participate in. But we have 2 other systems that have been left behind. We have our legal system and our people structures that are still running with 19th century, 20th century, if we're generous, corporate structures. So we have SAs, BVs, LLCs, C Corps, GmbHs, all of these structures in the world, all over the world. Guess what? They don't have those self-organizing principles baked into them. They're not dynamic. They're not holarchic. Power is still held personally. And if we have systems that allow us to run our organizations without a management hierarchy, where there are no bosses, what are we still doing with employees? These are the next steps, where we push the bounds of self-organization and power holding ever further. And so what we're doing at Encode.org, the company that I founded a couple years ago, is we're upgrading these 2 systems. So we have the organizational system that we've talked about this morning, but we've left a couple systems behind. The legal company, where we encode things like ownership and equity and liability and boards and officers. These need to be changed. And another container of people. If not employees, what then? So we have a big movement in the world about independent contractors, digital nomads, freelancers, independent agents. So Uber and the equivalents all over the world are changing the work relationships. What do we do with the collective of people who are not employees that happen to care about the purpose? So we're creating new structures that tie everything together and bring right back in the middle, the core is human. The core actually is about you and your purpose and your relationship to a bigger purpose, the purpose you want to serve in the world. And we create a complete container where we have self-organized end-to-end. And this is what's next. A complete self-organizing system that allows for each individual, each one of us, to show up as an agent of purpose, to be autonomous and choose where we want to spend our time, energy, and talent in service of something greater than ourselves, the organization's purpose. So this is where it's going. This is where it's been, from my perspective, my 10-year journey of self-organization as a classic entrepreneur and change agent, growing frustrated with the status quo, thinking that there must be a better way, probably like you in the audience, which brings you here. There's got to be a better way to show up at work, to create a company, to lead people and manage people. And a little bit for me about what's next, beyond just self-organizing the work, to the other power structures that impact how we show up day to day. So, in this new world of work, I encourage you to explore. We've got great topics, great speakers, folks that I know, folks that are doing this work all over the world. And be in the question of those 5 principles. And be in the question of what is your now and your next, and how you're going to be an agent of purpose in the world. Thank you.
谢谢，非常感谢 Tom。我们最后还有大约5到10分钟的时间，看看现场的伙伴有没有什么问题想跟 Tom 来交流的，可以举手示意我。OK， 后面有一位同事伙伴，话筒。稍等一下。
您好，我们 们是一家创业公司，然后我们在实行合同制的这个原则，也是在实践的过程当中探索了几年。我有2个问题，第一个问题是对于最重要的我们的这个合同制的这个原则使命的这个探索的过程中，您认为我个人认为是你的所有的这个合同制里面的这个元素，它的认知边界会非常的重要。那我想问一下，就是我们如何去让就是打破这个个人的认知边界，从而在这个组织里面形成这个共识，或者说打破这个认知边界，您认为最重要的一个地方是什么？第2个问题是我们在这个进阶的权力的这个进化体系的过程当中，我们分权，但是分权和公司的这个风险把控之间如何去做一个平衡？这是或者说您认为看到的做的比较好的一些案例，或者是说您认为做的比较成功的，就是在这个平衡的过程当中做的比较成功的，是可以分享一下。对。
Translation?
Oh,
No.
Oh my God.
I'm pretty good intuitive, but.
So the first question is that we think when we move to the this latest company right now is running the Holacracy for a few years, and so they think that the purpose is really important. But you know, before we moved into the self-management organization, everyone had their own mindset. So how we can break out and then rebuild up our own purpose and also our organization's purpose? Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, so back to that funny thing about purpose. It is paradoxically the most important thing that you can have. And it doesn't need to be sophisticated or right 100% the first time. So in an evolutionary process, we're kind of trained to predict and control. We must get it right. There must be a purpose that informs everything. That is wrong. There is a sense of what's needed. What's the gift or offering this organization is making to the world? What does the world need this organization to be? And it's not a marketing statement. It's an internal self-sense. Just like your own. You have your own sense of your work in the world. Is it to take care of your family, raise your kids, create a new product? Who knows? What we want is a sense of alignment around your personal purpose and the organization's purpose. And with a self-organizing system like Holacracy or others, then we can change the purpose at any time, dynamically, as our sense of it changes and matures. So purpose is paradoxically the most important thing and the less important thing to get right out of the gate the first time.
谢谢 Tom. Okay, the second question. Okay, the second question is that actually once we distribute our leadership, how can we handle the a lot of risky, happen everywhere? Yeah, do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, so how do we handle risk and decision making when we're accustomed to a management hierarchy and trusting an individual, right? How do we trust the system? The only honest answer to that is over time, you develop more trust, and those decisions that you would ordinarily associate with an executive are still decisions that need to be made. This is not just an aspirational, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we could do something other than the business basics required. So if there's work to be done, and a decision to be made, and a decision that carries risk, you create a role or a placeholder for that decision, and you put the right person into that role that has the best capacities to make that decision. And then you follow. You let that person lead. So this goes to the autonomy, leadership, and followership, where everybody's participating in how to structure where the power lives. But once the individual has that power, by virtue of the system, you follow that person's decision. And then you dynamically steer if and when the risks show up. So it's a big shift where we're accustomed to having one person make the tough decision heroically, and then either celebrate that decision or blame that person if the decision is wrong. It changes the fundamental dynamics of that.
好，最后一个问题。OK， 这位先生，我先看到他，好吗？
谢谢 Tom，Thank you Tom。我来自一所北京的华德福学校。那华德福学校呢，它也是一个世界性的运动。那么它在不同的文化当中会碰到当地的这个文化的问题。那么我想就是说，这个组织进化呢，它也是个世界性的一个运动。这里边是不是有个文化的维度？我想请这个 Tom 从这方面呢来做一些评论。
So he come from a school. Yeah, school. Yeah. So he said that it's also mentioned we're talking about the culture. You know, it's like a global trend, but every country and every location maybe have their own culture. So what do you think about this part, culture differences?
Yes, for sure. There are cultural overlays, for sure, when you're implementing a self-organized system. It has to do with your relationship to power, what the culture's relationship to power is. So that's one of the key markers. How are you going to relate with power being distributed differently, not being held personally? That influences then culture, right? And you want to separate these things apart. Personal power holding from organizational distributed or organizational decision making, and then let a natural culture develop amongst the people without the power overlays. So this is where culture and organizational culture, which I think is a misnomer, quite frankly. I think organizational culture is not about the people. It's not even about the organization's culture. We need to separate those two things. We have a culture of humans that are doing work together, separate from the organizational systems to run and structure the organization in pursuit of purpose. So we separate those two things. We allow the organization to run itself independent of culture, and then we allow a much deeper, richer, more intimate human culture to emerge, separate from the organizational power system. Right now, in the conventional systems, they're fused.
OK， 谢谢 Tom。因为今天时间有限哈，但是我们鼓励大家在这个休息的时间，包括午餐的时间，都可以跟我们的很多演讲嘉宾有更多的这个沟通和互动。所以我们以热烈的掌声感谢 Tom 给我们的这次分享，谢谢。